Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized, where truth survives, and we always have your back. We are on episode 63, OMG. We have an incredible episode with Dr. Ian Garner. He just wrote the book Z Generation, all about how Russia is radicalizing its youth toward fascism, how they're doing it, what we can compare here in America, what we can learn from it, and how we can actually expose it and help the young people in Russia, as well as I won't give away the plot, but it's really, really fantastic.
In deference to Dr. Garner's nation of origin, we should say it's the Z generation.
Yeah, right. So those of you who've watched all these episodes, thank you so much. But if you're a newcomer, I'm Heidi Cuda, a veteran investigative reporter. This is a show about where we investigate disinformation, where it's coming from, identify it, and fight it. I'm here with Jim Stewartson, who's a filmmaker and an amazing activist in his own right. And I'm also here with Fidelity, who is an incredibly terrific technologist and network analyst and quite the newsie. All right, gentlemen, anything you want to say before we jump into Front Loaded?
Let's go.
Nope.
Let's do it.
Front Loaded.
All right. So today, which will be yesterday when you guys watch this, I dropped a very personal story in Byline Supplement titled How I Lost My Father to Fox News, where I interview family members whose dads were radicalized by Fox. And I also, identify a few other bloviating right-wing hosts, as our friend Jen Senko might say. But it's a deep dive on Murdoch family harms, and it's also a call for meaningful action. We interview one of our friends from Truth Over Fox, and she said this incredible quote. They're the ones who are out on Tuesdays protesting against Fox in front of the headquarters. She wrote, or she told me, we're not trying to convince people that Fox is hurting America. Most people already know that. Our message is that it's not hopeless, that together Americans can and must put the brakes on the Murdochs. And we talk about how we can do that. So please check that out. It's an important story. Any comments before we move on?
I'm just amazed that, Fox News, after being outed as platforming lies, which were detrimental to our democracy and led to January 6th, still have a license to broadcast. Like, don't we have an FCC?
Well, we actually peel it back and go even further, because I identify studies that show that those who were Fox News viewers are the most likely to have died from COVID. These are actual academic studies showing that there was higher death rates among those who watch shows such as Hannity. So this is deep. I hope people read it. I hope they also support Byline Supplement. That is independent investigative journalism, which is so necessary right now.
If you do, and I've done this, you take a map of the death rates of COVID and overlay it on top of Republican/MAGA beliefs, it's fucking identical, literally identical. It just sits right on top of it. Like, all the same counties that vote red have fucking people dying. That's what's going on here. It's a death cult.
Well, we here on RadPod expose it week after week, and we are not memory holing any of it. In that article, I interview a woman from the Isle of Wight who, like me and Jen Senko, were alarmed when our very liberal fathers started drifting away from what their core always was. And this woman from the Isle of Wight heard her dad on YouTube. She heard the words immigrant, immigrant, immigrant coming out. She ran downstairs and she's like, Dad, what are you watching? And YouTube's algorithm had pushed him to the right, and he was watching Steve Bannon and buying his book and Nigel Farage. And this is what that was the ecosystem being force fed to her father. And what she did is she couldn't take it anymore. And one day she sat him down and said, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I don't like what this is doing to our relationship. Dad, what's going on? And just like Jen Senko's mom, she changed the fucking channel and she got her father back. Not all of us were that lucky, but it can be done. So again, please read Byline Supplement, support if you can. And speaking of independent journalism, my Substack, Heidi Cuda, .substack.com, was attacked this weekend by what was likely an active measures campaign to try to use fear and depravity to silence me on Substack and really, quite frankly, freak out my supporters with a grotesquerie. I just want those to know who might engage in this type of hybrid warfare and tactics. It failed brilliantly. It backfired brilliantly. My supporters have doubled down on their support. And I also decided to unlock key reports of mine so my work can be shared more widely. And it actually has resulted in an unbelievable amount of new members and subscribers. So I'm very grateful that people are starting to see past these scare tactics. Anything you want to say before I move on?
Well, yeah. Look, these people, the same people, have been doing this to me on my Substack for a fucking year. For like, they got me banned from Twitter. I went to Substack, and they've been attacking me there for a fucking year, right? Why are they attacking Heidi? Why are they attacking me? Because we're fucking right. Because we give a shit. And your job is to make people not give a shit. Your job is to make people like us look insane. But guess what? You're the ones getting paid to make fucking Substack accounts and like them with dirty fucking avatar pictures. I mean, seriously, what kind of dumb grade school dipshits are you? You really think that's going to work in the adult, sane community? Stop. No, you're not helping yourself, and it's just enough, guys.
Well, it's a form. So this is not the first time it's happened to me. There's been various forms of this since 2018. And it is a form of economic terrorism. These are targeted harassment campaigns. They vary in scope and in size and in scale, but they do have economic impacts, which is why I directly hit it head on, pointing that out, because from when the moment the attack happened to the time I actually wrote about it, I had no new members, no new subscribers. They were fucking freaked out. And then I exposed what was happening and got an incredible amount of support back. But I want to bring something up. So
there's going to be a lot of exposing soon.
Yeah.
The source of these people is known.
Yeah.
And it will be widely known in the near future. I'm just going to say
they should out themselves and go work for as a barista for a while, and
they're not going to do it themselves. Somebody's going to do it for them.
Hi-Fi, anything before I move on? Because there's a very important link I want to make.
I just want to say this to those in our audience who are our detractors, because I'm sure they're listening. At this point in time, you have one of two options available to you. You might still think that you're going to win, which you won't, because we're too god dang determined. And the second thing is, you could roll over, or you could accept the fact that you've gone in so far that you are now engaging in treason and wait for that shoe to fall. So good luck, y'all.
That was just like Hi-Fi's little happy moment. So the economic terrorism aspect of this, because again, I've been harmed over and over again by various harassment campaigns, but I think the what I would like to actually draw people's attention to, well, two things. One is exposure. I think it's incredibly important that rather than cower in a corner, which is what I did in 2018, because I didn't know where to go when I was being harmed online and offline. Instead, I don't know if you can bring the thread up, but I put it out there for all the world to see and unlocked all the main stories that I've been reporting on. If you scroll down, you'll see the fact that the West is finally going after Putin's cash. You're going to see why Chris Wray needs to be fired and freed up so he can work directly for the Russians like his colleagues. You'll see why Hi-Fi calls DeSantis the new mainstream Satan. You'll get a year of reporting in Ukraine, a tribute to Boris Nemtsov, and all the fascist techniques that are being currently employed. I figure that sunlight is kind of the best fix for this. So please, everybody, if you can, share the work. Let's get more eyes on it. Supporting independence gives us the kind of economic power we need to fight back. And on that note, I think it's very important that everybody is aware of disinformation researcher Nina Jankowicz's GoFundMe. She is going to sue Fox News, which trolled her out of a very important federal job. She announced that she was going to be heading up a very important disinformation board, something that we need so desperately in America. From the moment the announcement came, she was harassed. She was pregnant at the time. And the first year of her son's life, she is enduring a targeted harassment campaign by Fox motherfucking News. And thankfully, some of my supporters are supporting her efforts to sue Fox. So please, if you can pull up her GoFundMe, Hi-Fi, the link should be there. Please find Nina Jankowicz on Twitter or wherever you can and support her efforts to sue Fox News for basically trolling her out of an incredibly important job.
Mm-hmm. Can I say also, at the risk of bashing, the Biden administration fucked that up so badly. That was one of the most concerning events I've seen in the entire Biden administration, who's done a lot of good work. Doing that disinformation board was a great idea. But the problem is, fucking Jack Posobiec had bad shit to say about it. Ooh, it's the Ministry of Truth. Ooh, look at Jankowicz is scary, and they're scary Democrats. Fucking get a pair, you fucking babies. You're gonna get trolled by disinformation agents if you try and combat disinformation. Don't you understand this very basic thing? It's mind-boggling that they didn't understand that when they fucking announce this, they better have their shit together because they're gonna get absolutely hammered. Who didn't know that in the entire federal government? Seriously, like somebody could have fucking called me and I would have told them exactly what was gonna happen. It's crazy.
Well, I'm glad she's fighting back.
Very upset at
I remember we talked about it on the show.
You are ignoring the fact that people are getting hurt all the time online. It's just like constant fucking war of people getting destroyed all the time. And these motherfuckers won't even acknowledge it. And it's really, really getting to me.
Oh, they absolutely should have backed her up and doubled down 100% and not let her resign. And I am really glad that people I know are actually supporting her. It's worth pointing out that some people are giving her $5 just so they can post disinformation and harassment on her timeline. So what I'm trying to say is what happened to me over the weekend, I'm not special. It happens to a lot of people. It happens to a lot of women. It happens to this team. But what we all have in common is we do fucking great work and we're influential, or they wouldn't bother with us. So
yeah, can I just emphasize that point about women? Listen, these fucking assholes have gone after all the women, all my favorite friends who all are women, by the way. No offense, Hi-Fi. I just like women more than I like dudes. I've just been very honest about that.
I don't like
And
anybody.
well, there's that too, but the good ones just tend to be women for strange reasons. I don't know.
Yeah, they
But
piss me off less than dudes.
these misogynistic incel little Nazis, like they can't get to me. So what do? They go after my friends. They go after women. They they went after my friend Gal. It's batshit. What the fuck is wrong with you, weak, spineless little shit?
That's exactly it right there. They're weak and they're spineless, and they're petty ankle biters, but in a horde, they're fucking annoying.
Yes. Well, it's also war. I mean, what I wrote about in the economic terrorism report is that, our leaders treat them, if they even reference them, like they're, ants at an annoying picnic. No, this is motherfucking war. We are the front lines of this war. And again, if we weren't doing good work, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So thank you for our supporters who stick by us through thick and thin. And speaking of very strong, incredibly brilliant women, our friend Sharn Norris has launched her own Substack. She just had a bomb-ass story in the Observer today. Please, she's been my writing partner at Byline Times for a few years now. Please support her. There are so many incredibly brave, brilliant writers, many of them women. Please go out of your way to support them. I'm really proud of her, and that's front loaded, guys.
There you go. All right, moving on to word phrase of the week this week. This week, we're going to use a German word because I think it's pretty fucking important that people understand the historical roots of some things. And that word this week is Lebensborn. What does Lebensborn mean? Lebensborn was a program executed by the National Socialists in Germany during World War II. Initially, it was intended to up the birth rate of the German population, specifically women who exhibited Aryan traits. It evolved to the point where during World War II, in occupied territories, Germany would actually steal children who they said had Aryan traits and spirit them away back to Germany to be raised by Germans and to become good foot soldiers for the Reich. The reason I chose this word phrase of the week this week for everyone to understand is because, what we know is going on in Russia right now, with Russia stealing Ukrainian children and spiriting them away to Russia and making them good little soldiers for Putin's new Reich. And of course, we also have down in Florida this atrocity where Florida courts could take emergency custody of kids with trans parents or siblings, even if they live in another state. So that is why Lebensborn is our word phrase of the week this week.
Right? We're going to be talking with Dr. Ian Garner about.
Yeah, I mean, let's be super clear about one thing. The Nazi problem isn't in Ukraine. That's not where the Nazi problem is. The Nazi problem isn't even in the United States. The Nazi problem is in the fucking Kremlin. Mm-hmm. That's where the Nazis are, and they have created lots of Nazis around them. Wagner is a giant Nazi terrorist organization. That's all it is. They literally have 88 in all their fucking handles. They're Nazis, like Nazis. All the Atomwaffen and all these stupid little fucking Nazi cults that popped up, it came from a website that was founded and run by a Russian spy.
Yeah.
So let's be super clear where all this Nazi shit comes from. It doesn't come from Ukraine. It doesn't even come from Germany. It comes from fucking Putin.
Well, with Dr. Garner, we're going to be learning how the youth are being groomed toward fascism in Russia. And one of the worst things that's happening that it's very important we all know about is they're using, particularly one case, a very handsome young influencer that the kids want to be like, and then they will parasitize it with Nazi ideology. And so that is how they are growing their youth army. And again, we're here to expose that stuff in the hopes that our Western leaders actually decide to take action. Because one of the things Dr. Garner explained is if we decide to use cyber tactics against them in Russia, we can actually come with truth. We can combat it with truth, as opposed to all this made up bullshit that we are continually, this unreality that we are continually tube fed, in the words of Zarina Zabriskie. So
yeah, I don't get it. I don't know why I mean, maybe we are, but why are we over there just telling the truth to people?
We talk about that a little bit. He said because maybe they're going to be able to say the CIA is doing this. They're already saying that, so we may as well go in and
anyway.
do it.
Right? Just roll with it. Just go. Right. Yeah, I'm CIA.
Yeah,
I'm
they're
CIA.
Scared.
So,
they're scared of bringing up the entire subject of Russia. They're tired of 2016. All of it. It's terror, and it's enough.
Or are they complicit and white supremacist? And do they think that, so a bit, a little column A, little column B, right? Okay, so let us, so that was important. Why it matters, High Fidelity.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
First story this week. Sorry, India. It's not you. It's Modi. Anyway. At a G20 meeting, India's Modi says global governance has failed. And this comes to us from Al Jazeera. I would point out that he is there shaking hands with Meloni, the far-right leader of Italy. Look, Modi's been a problem for quite some time. If you're aware of history, India invoked an emergency law recently to ban a Modi documentary that accused him of playing a part in the 2002 riots, on which he rose to power. If you are familiar with the work of Dr. Emma Bryant, you will know that Cambridge Analytica and SCL were running operations in India as recently as 2014 for the BJP. And if you need any other questions about where India's loyalties lie, I would remind everyone that the importation of Russian oil by India has skyrocketed, so much so that it surpasses Saudi Arabia. So, sorry, India.
Why that matters to me is that this entire operation that we've been exposing is all about trying to make people believe that liberal democracies are failing globally. So the strongmen, who are basically there to hide their own corruption and their cohort's corruption, can say only I can fix it. So that is an unreality that Modi is selling his people.
Indeed. And I would remind everyone that, Donald Trump paid a visit to Mr. Modi while he was president here. And if you saw any of the footage from that trip, Mr. Trump was not happy to be there, but I'm sure he was ordered there to be there by his boss, Putin.
Yeah. Who's spent a lot of time in India is Charles Flynn.
Really?
His buddy has been doing all kinds of joint exercises and stuff at the same time as Modi is going to visit with some very bad folks. There's a very, very dangerous situation brewing down there, and we have to it's yet another front in this fucking war.
Yeah,
it's still right. Amazing. It's still amazing that our government refuses to acknowledge it. All right, moving on. Next story this week. Data is a dagger pointed at your heart. And this is a couple stories, right?
It's very romantic almost.
Well, you may think of it as romantic. I think of it more as
This isn't romantic.
This is more
romantic.
gothic romantic because an online counseling company named BetterHelp was fined by the FTC $7.8 million to stop sharing patient data. In the data that was shared were explicit comments about specific mental health issues that their patients were undergoing.
Yeah, that sounds bad.
So if you know, one of the things we talk about on this show is targeting through vulnerabilities. And if someone knows what your specific mental health issues are, you can certainly be targeted for some sort of operation, be it online or in real life, used against you. So data is a dagger. But I would also like to point out there's a second story that came out. Facebook and Google are handing over user data to help police prosecute abortion seekers. This is the most egregious use of data by a company I can think of. And I'm sure that there's some way this violates something because it doesn't seem to violate the law.
Well, that's because laws are being changed. I mean, I was telling Dr. Garner, I had to go all the way outside of our own country to see the enormity and the amount of bills that have been created to go after gay people in America. I was listening to Peter Tatchell's podcast, and over 1,000 bills, and Arkansas and Tennessee banning drag shows, and there's a genital scrutiny bills, and so our as David Pepper has taught us, the fights in the state houses, and we are not on offense right now. So
no, I think we need to start examining religious extremism laws and reestablishing the separation of church and state. And what you're seeing is, of course, lawfare, right? I mean, it's the far right attempting to turn us into Russia, to turn us into fascists, and seize our arsenal for nothing good.
I mean, they're overt about trying to destroy the foundational premise of the United States of America, which is separation of church and state. The entire purpose of the revolution, of all of it, was to get people out from the oppression of theocracy. We need to, like, anytime some fucking fascist says that, we're a Christian country based on Judeo-Christian values, tell them to fuck themselves right in the eye. No. That's not what it says. That's literally not what the Constitution says. They always bring up the First Amendment. Oh, freedom of religion. That means we can impose it on you. Absolutely not. The First Amendment says we have freedom from religion. Yes, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? But you cannot impose it on me. And you cannot use the government to do anything. That's what it says. That's the whole point. So please, just push back against this shit wherever you see it, because God knows we're going to start pulling back. Oh, we're not saying there's no God. We're not. Oh, don't be so angry with us, fucking fascist Nazis. Fuck them. Defend the actual Constitution, not the invented one that they're trying to sell you.
Right in the eye.
I would actually go.
I don't know why I said that. But that seems good.
Right in the eye.
But I would like to point out to our audience that if anybody tries to sell you this bullshit about we're a Christian nation, straight facts, the Treaty of Tripoli, 1797, Article 11, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That's straight. Yeah.
There,
It's written down, folks. Sorry.
So speaketh our Google teddy bear.
Google Bear.
Our Google bear.
All you got to know is the facts.
All right, what you got?
You know what?
Next, Google Bear? Come on, let's do it.
Actually, I want to go back to something you said, Jim. Attacking the foundation of America, because that does lead us into our next story. And our next story is get rich and keep lying. And this...
He's so proud of his headlines. He's so proud of his headlines.
I am. That's a good one. Come on.
Yeah.
Get rich and keep lying.
Sure.
Because Mr. Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society and foaming at the mouth Opus Dei board member of the Catholic Information Center, the man who has appointed 3 absolutely unqualified justices to our Supreme Court. 5?
Yeah.
Jesus.
He goes back. Yeah, he goes back.
Way back.
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he got rich while he was doing it. Apparently, in the latest round of funding, he's pocketed a few $1 million from all of his dark money donors. So it's interesting to see that even while they're eroding the foundation of our democracy, they're making sure that they get rich and keep lying.
I'm pretty sure there was somebody who was planning on donating like over $1 billion to him, actually. Leonard Leo, just briefly, Opus Dei and a Knight of Malta. Knight of Malta,
yeah, I forgot that.
As a reminder, is an extremist Catholic branch of the Catholic Church that operates like its own quasi-nation state. There's 13,000 members, and every single one of them is literally fighting the Crusades. That's the entire point, is to eliminate Muslims and to eliminate all the dirty, not white Catholic people. That's what he's part of, along with terrorist Eric Prince, who converted to Knight of Malta after he was an intern in Dana Rohrabacher's office. Dana Rohrabacher is the guy that everybody in Congress said that Putin pays.
And Dana Rohrabacher is responsible for my first harassment campaign.
Yeah, and the circle is closed.
Such a fun little hellscape we live in. You know what?
Jim Stewartson's hellscape. Oh, fuck.
You know, I have changed my mind 4 times about what this fucking hellscape was going to be about while we were doing the news. Because so much of what we're talking about in the news and what we're talking about with what's going on with us personally is about war. It's about invisible war, at least invisible to our authorities and to our media. I'm sorry, but when people are trying to get Heidi to have less people on her Substack, that's war. For 30 fucking months, I have been turned upside down every which way and backwards by a coordinated harassment campaign of epic proportions. My Substack has had layers and layers and layers of scat porn labeled Jim's mom, like the most juvenile, disgusting, despicable shit you can possibly imagine. For 2.5 years, I've been putting up with this shit. I wanted to let you know I am about to not put up with it anymore. And what I'm going to do is expose the roots of this nest of basement dwellers that have been attacking me and Heidi and the rest of my friends. I am going to shine a goddamn floodlight in the rotten fucking kitchen that you roaches have been collecting in. I'm done. I'm also done with the liars, the propagandists who put themselves out there as experts, who go on fucking podcasts and go on TV and lie their asses off. They lie about QAnon. They lie about Mike Flynn. They lie about Russia. They lie about PSYOPs. And guess what? The liars are the ones that everybody's listening to. I am done with that now. I am going to expose them. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because they're just part of this same group that's putting stupid, pornographic, asinine shit on our Substacks. It's literally the same group of people. Also, you're going to be amazed by this, but the ringmaster of this whole thing also helped start Q. There's a fucking reason why I have been documenting this so carefully for a year on my Substack. There's a reason why I have databases full of your fucking tweets. There is a reason I have identified nearly all of you. And there's a reason why I have kept my mouth mostly shut about you for the last several months. The reason is because I have better shit to do. I'm, for whatever reason, pushing trends around and getting a lot of attention, a lot of noise out there, and telling the fucking truth. And people are getting it. And you are so wound up about it that you're starting to go after Heidi again? Fuck you. We're done with that part. Arrest Mike Flynn.
Oh, Dr. Ian Garner, we are so excited to have you with us today. Your work is vitally important, and it is actually right in our sweet spot. This is the stuff that we want people, our viewers are global, and we want our global viewers to understand where this radicalization is coming from. And we here in America have a big problem with youth radicalization because there's a lot of money in an organization called Turning Point USA, where it's very well financed, and they are actually able to lure young people into their events by paying people to actually target them. And of course, we know the history of Nazi Germany and what occurred with youth there. So please tell us a bit about yourself and why it was so important for you to write Z Generation.
So I'm a researcher and analyst. I work at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, although you can tell from my accent that I am not originally a Canadian. I studied in England, and then I studied at university in Russia as well. I studied at the St. Petersburg Conservatory before coming over to Canada to do my graduate work and now my research. And what I've always been really interested in is why Russians think the way they do, why this culture that, especially in the west of the country, feels and looks like it should be European has been so distinctly different from our own. And of course, I've been interested in it for over a decade and a half, but we've seen this blow up in the public eye over the last year or so. And the latest book that I've written, Z Generation, is a deep dive into the increasing radicalization of young Russians. And it's been a huge and difficult project to do. It was something that I had in mind. I kind of started laying the groundwork for a similar project before the war broke out in Ukraine in last February. But when the war started, I thought it was timely and important to push that research project forward as fast as possible and show the world how the state is managing to reach out and activate young Russian minds. There is often a sense amongst Russian scholars, and especially journalists who cover Russia, and I'm not going to go off on rants about mainstream journalists, don't get me wrong, but it's sort of accepted wisdom that the Russian public is somehow politically apathetic, just uninterested in politics. And there was a sense, I think, in the early 2000s, maybe up to about 2011, early 2012, in which the state, to a certain extent, did inculcate a certain apathy and relied on an apathy, offered people sort of shiny goodies, iPhones, foreign trips, stuff like that to keep them happy, basically, and let the Kremlin do what the Kremlin's doing. But that, to me, is very outdated thinking. When you read the book and discover the ways, and hopefully we'll talk about some of them today, that the state is beginning to push children, especially children who don't know about alternatives, into a highly ideological form of understanding the world, we should be quite frightened. There's no guarantee that the state will manage to bring up a generation of fascist youth who are raving mad and desperate for war and desperate for genocide, but that is what they are trying to do. And we have to be ready, even though it's difficult, to face down the idea that, as improbable as it might be, they might succeed.
Incredible. Thank you for that intro. We have here a coordinated, targeted effort to dismantle our school systems, dismantle our school boards, radicalize them, and encourage parents to homeschool. And I investigated what might be behind that, and that, I think, is because they are trying to build their own army internally here. So I hear this, and it is it's very it's very real, very upsetting, and I'm so glad that you're exposing it, because we see these clips all the time out of Russia of the 5-year-olds who are proudly showing how they know how to, disassemble and reassemble an automatic rifle. We see them propagandized, against Ukrainians, and to know where it's coming from is very important if we're going to figure out a way to treat it. So I think that it's incredible that you're doing it. And in this research, what were some of the most important things for our viewers to know on how it's being done and how it's being coordinated?
Ever since that turn in 2012, when Putin returned to the presidency, we always sort of forget almost, because it feels like a blip, but he actually swapped seats with Dmitry Medvedev for 4 years because there was a constitutional limit on the amount of terms that he could have in a sequence. But he came back in 2012 and he was really spooked by a number of events. The financial crisis, which hit Russia hard because it was so reliant on resources. The Arab Spring, which was happening around that time. There'd been a number of so-called color revolutions around the sort of former post-Soviet space as well. So Georgia in the early 2000s, Ukraine 2004. Putin was worried that the same could happen at home. And so when you look at late 2011, huge protests broke out in Russia. That was Bolotnaya Square. That was Alexei Navalny, a whole series of leaders. These were really, really big protests. They were shut down.
Boris Nemtsov.
Yeah, Nemtsov was another of the leaders there. And of course, he was shot just 8 years ago this week.
I know.
And what the state did in response to this was Putin was highly paranoid that a color revolution could come here, that this was a kind of CIA-sponsored plot. It was a plot from the outside, but also a plot coordinated by enemies within. And so what they started to do in fields as varied as popular culture, education, foreign policy, religious politics at home is to strip back what we would call as scholars identity pathways that young people could have. In a country like Canada, where I am right now, a young person has almost infinite amounts of identity pathways. You can associate being Canadian with a lot of different things. It might mean being religious, but also being a social liberal and maybe a fiscal conservative, for example. Right? There's a whole grab bag of stuff that you can just take and sort of shake and mix it up and it comes out however you want. But for Putin, that's dangerous because the more identity pathways there are, the more chances there are that his support can be eaten away at in opposition groups. And therefore, in schools, pretty quickly after that 2012 period, and across these various other elements of culture that I'm sure we'll get into, in particular on the internet, we start seeing a single identity pathway being promoted. And that is being Russian means to be Orthodox Christian, a particularly violent and, of course, blasphemous form of Orthodox Christianity. It doesn't resemble real Christianity at all. I'm not religious, but I don't think that's controversial to say. It means being macho, it means being heterosexual, and it means being violent and aggressive and seeking out enemies of all of those things and attacking them physically and attacking them verbally, attacking them online, and of course going to war against a country like Ukraine, because Ukraine, by choosing a European path for itself, is not choosing what Putin would think of as the proper Russian path, because he considers Ukraine a part of Russia.
That's just brilliant. I mean, everything you said there is what an incredible summary. Hi-Fi, I know you want to talk about the social media platforming of this.
It's very interesting to me because you know what we saw here with regards to January 6th is we saw data aggregation and people targeted by vulnerabilities for radicalization, and thus we had things like QAnon, and our veterans were targeted for radicalization. So we had Oath Keepers and 3%ers and things like that. And you state in your book that it's not so much these little niche groups like we have here, but it's more an overall broad radicalization of almost the entire population using vKontakte, right? Using Telegram. And also the thing I found really interesting was you talk about the protests where they lure the youth with, hey, we're going to have a party, there'll be celebrities, blah, blah, blah. All you have to do is walk around and wave this flag, right? That to me is, that's chicanery. That is, you know, that is what chanology was. That is what Jim's augmented reality games are. They're people playing roles in public to present a narrative. How has that been used by Russia? All those things.
You can see this being used even in the earliest days of Putin's regime. And so much of Putin's domestic politics has been based around kind of aesthetic performance. The creation of the sense that people are behind the president and behind Putin's project, even if they're not. And this is so effective in a big country like Russia, and increasingly as we live what us scholars would call mediatized realities, whereby our reality is defined and limited by the media with which we engage. And of course, increasingly in the West, and I think that's what you're alluding to, we're bubbled off from each other, right? We can be fragmented and be bubbled very, very easily. You know, you can look back to like 2000, 2001, and Putin's so-called Grey Cardinal Vladislav Surkov, who came up with a lot of this strategy. He's now on the out. He's no longer in the Kremlin, but he laid down the kind of the guidelines of how this works. Surkov was creating this group walking together. I talk about it in the book, where basically they would grab provincial youths from outside Moscow, bus them in, give them train tickets into the capital, turn up on a big parade day. Literally in neo-Nazis, the Russian independent press was investigating this at the time.
Yeah.
Stick on a Putin t-shirt, cover up your swastika tattoo. I'm not exaggerating. It sounds like I am, but I promise I'm not.
Right.
The investigations that the Russian journalists were doing at the time. But on TV, it makes for this great and impressive picture.
Yeah. Theater
right?
craft.
This uniformity, this sense that the youth was behind us. So when you're off thousands of miles away in Chelyabinsk or Khabarovsk, or cities that probably most people listening know very little about, right? Exactly. We're showing already.
Like who?
What you see is, I don't know what's happening in Moscow, but look, those cool young kids in downtown Moscow, they seem to like this guy. They're not out protesting against him.
Wow.
And of course, as the state, and I don't need to go into here the extent to which the Russian state controls the media.
Right.
As the state's control of the media has expanded vastly over the last few years, it's only actually become easier to project that kind of image in spite of the existence of alternate bubbles.
Incredible. That whole theater craft is something that I write a lot about. And we also had a reality TV president who was, network made and sponsored Hi-Fi.
I just need to point out the reason this is so interesting to me. In America, the tactics, the internet tactics and the ARG tactics were used to fracture our society, whereas in Russia, they're being used to present this appearance of a cohesive society.
Yeah.
And it just, it's a war tactic, it seems.
At the same time, when we look at that sort of period after 2012, the strategy was very clear. As well as presenting this kind of single identity pathway, here is what it means to be a good Russian. There is also the sense that the state is saying everybody who falls outside of that is equally and synonymously dangerous and threatens to destroy Russia. And that's why you get the anti-homosexual propaganda laws in 2013. Right. You get increasing anti-Ukrainian propaganda. It's why somebody can be a Jewish gay Nazi in the world of Russian propaganda. Because if you're not Russian, you must be bad. And all things are equally bad if they're not Russian. There's a real topsy-turvy logic. But you can see how in this reality it can come together in its own sort of strange space and strange way.
Well, that's the great thing about fake realities is you can make them however you want. One of the things I find incredibly funny about this reality they're creating, this anti-homophobic reality, is anyone in Russia who has publicly stated that Putin is bisexual has ended up dead. Yeah. And that was told to us by John Sweeney.
John Sweeney, yeah.
So
that is, again, I'm going to keep using this word, brilliant. We specialize in brilliant guests, and you are not disappointing us. The way you just framed that was so incredibly important, because we have that confusion here. How can somebody, who has a gay child be so extremist? But you just explained why. It's like that identity, that nationalism, that fervor. And what I have learned from my studies with historians is that once a country gets a thirst for authoritarianism, there are ways that the state then feeds it. And we have a petri dish happening in Florida right now in America, and everything you're talking about is being adopted, whether it's happening in Hungary or Russia, it's being adopted by a governor right now in Florida. I want to talk about your book and how is God and the weaponization of religion, what role does this play in radicalizing the youth of Russia?
Okay, we've got to get really abstract and very mythical, historical here. So bear with me, because it gets a bit weird. In
cool.
Russia,
the show specializes in weird.
So a very quick crash course in Russian historical sort of theology and myth is that the dominating vision of Russian history has been one in which Russia has been the so-called Third Rome.
Yes.
The last Christian Orthodox bastion standing against Catholicism, the Muslim world threatening from all sides. Right? And it's been Russia's historical duty to go out and save the Orthodox world, and therefore the only world, the only civilization worth saving, because it's the only non-heathen world. It did it in 1812 when Napoleon was invading. All the armies of Europe couldn't beat Napoleon. This is the Russian version of the story, at least. And Russia gloriously beat Napoleon and then sent him packing off back to Paris as they went off in hot pursuit. They did it, and this is the most important reference. They did it in World War II. And World War II keeps coming up today, right? And I'm sure you might have more questions about it. But the core of the narrative of World War II in the Russian perception is this, that 27 million Russian citizens and troops, and bear in mind, they rarely call them Soviet troops nowadays. Mostly they call them Russian troops, even though that's highly misleading for anyone who is Ukrainian and listening. Immediately alarm bells will be ringing. They died in order to save the world, and the world was saved on the Eastern Front. But here is the important thing. In the Russian conception, martyrdom is vital. It wasn't regrettable that they died, right? Because the way we talk about the war is, well, we're very thankful for the sacrifices people made during the war, but we wish the troops didn't have to die. If we could have done it with zero death toll, who wouldn't take that? We'd all be delighted. But in the Russian conception of self-sacrifice, this sort of messianic idea, the martyrdom had to happen. The death had to happen. And my first book was about Stalingrad, which is where this myth all came together. And that is very sort of courses through the culture today. And so when we think today about what's happening, the idea is that once more Russia is going to face down this enormous threat from outside, that Russian boys are dying at the front, that it is good and holy and you are sanctifying yourself by dying at the front, by making sacrifices, because to do so means recreating the world, somehow birthing the sort of, and they talk about it as the dawn of a new day, right? Which is the classical mythical turn of darkness to light, death to life. And once again, it all seems wild from the outside, but when you are within this, and it is sort of a quasi-religion with temples that are churches and war monuments with rituals like those wild Victory Day parades we see, which are cheesy and silly with kids dressing up in cheap costumes. But when you're on the inside of this kind of religion, it all makes sense. It all fits into place. And I think when we think about support for the war today, and I apologize, Heidi, this isn't quite answering your question.
Oh, no, keep going, man. It's incredible. I'm grateful.
When we think about support for the war today, we often ask the wrong questions. We ask, do Russians support the war? Do they support this war? Well, maybe they're tired, and this is frequently what I'm not the only one to come back to. Maybe they're tired of this war because they think it's logistically it's going badly, right? But are they opposed to the idea of a war, a great sort of civilizational clash between East and West? No. On the whole, most people, there's a sort of ingrained background cultural idea that just drips through the culture that the state pushes, for sure. The state uses AstroTurf social media group. It uses influencers very wisely. It uses school syllabuses increasingly well to push this. But people take it and run with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have another question, but Hi-Fi, go ahead.
So one of the things I found funny, because I also see it happening here in the United States, is you talk about the head of Walking Together and how there was some sort of impropriety and accusations made. So that group disbanded, dispersed. But then what happened?
So about 5 minutes later, same guy comes roaring back to form another group, which is very similar, but a little more organized and a lot more interested in ideological re-education. It has an actual kind of a manifesto, a political platform. And that group is called Nashi. And Nashi is the group that maybe more people will have heard of than Walking Together. And Nashi exists for about 5 or 6 years. It never really takes off, though. It tops out at somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 members. And of those members, a lot of them are quite disengaged. They're sort of fair weather members. And I talked to a couple of people who'd been in Nashi for research in the book. And they basically told me, well, we went because it was convenient for our career, right? You get brownie points when you're applying to university. You want to go work in the government civil service. But that is important because people who were engaged in this kind of ideological re-education project, even if they didn't believe it, are going on to hold significant roles in society today. And there was a large preponderance of neo-Nazis and openly neo-fascist young men, especially, rather than women who were involved in that group.
I want to talk about, you talk about the unholy trinity of power in today's Russia. And by the way, the book is just so well written. I mean, it is just so direct, and people will be able to access all the information. And I really appreciate that. You talk about the unholy trinity of power in today's Russia as the state, the media, and the church. And then you talk about how the Russian Federation and the state moved very, swiftly to deny access to outside information, and the way that they shut down independent media. And I'm feeling that right now because I was just attacked this weekend, and I am an independent investigative reporter. And you use the frame, publicly, or the framing, publicly assaulted by heavies and hooligans. I love that line. And I also think that the heavies and hooligans assault is also something that's been occurring virtually to independent media that does this kind of work. But there's this disconnect, certainly here in America, that it's war. And any comments on that? Because, how are we supposed to navigate our way out of this when there isn't even an admission that we are here in America and elsewhere a target nation of ongoing cyber warfare by heavies and hooligans?
I think this is one of the things that alarms me the most. That I wrote the book, as I mentioned, in part because we need to know and we need to be prepared that this is something that's real. And in the conclusion to the book, I explore with some policymakers and experts some different ways that we might reach out to young Russians. But really, it comes down to understanding that Russia is already trying to influence our young people in the same kinds of ways.
Yes.
And yes, it can't send heavies over to beat up young gay kids, as it has done for the last 15 years in Russia, using first football hooligans and then in slightly more organized ways. But what it can do is influence young people. It can reach out on Reddit forums, on TikTok, on Twitter, you name it. And the problem that we have, just as the problem that young Russians who aren't interested in Putin's messages and Putin's regime have, is that our smartphones are just part of day-to-day life. We cannot close them off. We cannot stop using them. And therefore we are vulnerable. And yet governments just do not seem to be taking it seriously. I don't know whether it's a willful ignorance, it's a lack of electoral appeal, a lack of kind of democratic motivation in doing this. Is it a vote winner to go tackle Russian disinformation? Maybe not. Or whether it's, I don't know, are they naive?
I would argue that actually Russia has sent heavies over here to beat up gay kids, transgender kids, and drag queens, and they call themselves the Proud Boys.
Sure.
Well,
Sure.
we have, we've done many reports on how some of the heads of neo-Nazi, organizations here, one in particular lives in St. Petersburg, and there's just, again, a disconnect. We talk about this also. Trump's Russia propaganda was actually very effective. One of the 4 Ds of Soviet era parasitizing dismissiveness. And that was actually very effective. So anybody who said, look, it's Russia that's targeting us, looked like they were tinfoilers, when in fact, no, actually, Russia was targeting us and is targeting us. My concern is based exactly on what you said. I don't know if it's lack of will in America that we do not have leaders standing up saying we are a target nation of cognitive warfare and your brain is the battlefield, and you should be concerned about your children. But I will say that I had a conversation with some young men who I'm very close to, and they're really brilliant, really, really well educated. And I said something about Russia, and they immediately indicated sympathy. And the freaking warning light went off going, are they on Telegram? In my head, I was like, are they on Telegram? And I have not yet asked the question because I don't want to, scare them away. But I'm fearful that if we don't do something, and again, is it like what we talk about? Is it because they're worried about capitalism? Trying to protect capitalism from democracy. Like, why would you not want to seal off this digital poison that's infecting brains and targeting brains? Why would you not want to? I think that's what we're trying to answer. I don't know why. Everyone's being impacted. I just had a story that came out today about our fathers being snatched away by Fox News. Liberal fathers are being targeted and stolen from families because of the industrial outrage complex that's occurring over at Fox. And then people like me, the daughters of these people who are stolen, who fight it, then get attacked, for the work that we do. And it's fucked up. And I don't know what we can do to wake up the Western world's leaders that this is happening and we better act. And your book, if your book is not, the alarm bell, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's really frustrating to see the way that this is quite openly gone on. And the Russian, we're quite aware of this. And the frustrating thing really is that when you look at the way that the Russian state has used social media over the last 10 to 15 years, they're actually not very good at it. One of the reasons, scooting back to something we were talking about a few minutes ago, one of the reasons the protests in 2011 took off in Moscow and across Russia against Putin so well was that the opposition was using Facebook, using Vkontakte, to reach out to young Russians, to write appealing messages and to gather. And the state just, at the time, hadn't really considered that social media could be used in that sort of a way. Now, they struck back pretty quickly with troll farms and DDoS attacks and all that kind of stuff. But, the blunt instruments of we're just going to go mess around in their spaces and harass them. And until about 3 or 4 years ago, and I'll explain how, they didn't really develop that approach in any significant way within Russia. And so let me show you an example of how they have done. Now, in 2016, the state decided to form this group, the Youth Army, and you might have seen these kids. These are the kids that wear the khaki sort of beige pants and red tops and red berets. It's a paramilitary youth group. It got a huge amount of state funding, supported by the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. And these kids it's not like cadets. These kids do real military training and real ideological indoctrination. And we know that because we have huge amounts of video of them doing it. They state openly on their website that this is what we're going to do. And for the first 3 years or so, they got quite a lot of kids enrolled. Pretty rapidly, I think by 2019, they had 350,000 kids enrolled. So that's quite a lot. That's way more than Nashi or any other youth group ever had, partly just because of the money and reach they had at the time.
Right.
But it was basically up until that point, late 2019, a pretty tedious, old-fashioned sort of, school gyms after class, repeating sort of Soviet-era kinds of propaganda outfit. It was not very appealing to kids. Then the penny dropped. They kicked out the leader, who was an old astronaut or cosmonaut, sort of textbook hero, but pretty grey figure, dull to listen to. Who did they get in instead? A guy called Nikita Nagorny, who is a world champion, an Olympic champion gymnast. I think he's still only 25 today, so he's more of a figurehead than a real administrative leader of the organization. And he is a handsome boy. Go look him up, Nikita Nagorny, Nagorny. Good looking guy, chisel jawed, big smile, perfect, rippling physique, clearly ethnically Russian, which is important. And even more important than that, Nagorny is an influencer. He has hundreds of thousands of followers. Kids want to be like him. Boys want to be like him because he's ripped. He posts workout videos. He shows them, he appeals to that sort of almost Andrew Tate kind of
bingo
section of teenage boys' brains. And of course, he's devilishly handsome and quite charming as well in his own weird way. And most of the time, what he talks about online is indeed, I'm Russian, I'm happy to be going to the next gymnastics event. And then from time to time, he'll post quite disturbing images of himself in uniform, saying, I support the re-education of Ukrainian children in Russia. I.e., between the lines, I support the kidnapping and, de-ethnicizing of Ukrainians.
Parasitizing, just.
And at the same time, they create new apps for the youth army. You can join the youth army. You do not have to go and fill out forms in triplicate like the good old days. Soviet bureaucracy. You can download the app, you can join, you take a selfie. I did it myself. I joined the youth army. It was that easy. It took me 5 minutes to fill out. I just, found some random stock image on Google and uploaded that using a burner phone, of course. I don't particularly want them in my phone. And then once you're in the group, you can play games online to win points and potentially win prizes. You can interact with other youth army members. You can go join their TikTok accounts. When you're at the youth army events, instead of just parading and marching, you might also be making TikTok videos about how cool it is to be in the youth army and how you can belong, right? And this is really appealing. And when, in addition to the book, I've written an academic paper, I'm just finishing it up now, about how effective this TikTok stuff is. And when you analyze the comments, what you find is that young youth army members are starting to just absorb this youth army stuff into their day-to-day life. So they imitate the stuff that they're seeing on the central accounts and on these influencers' accounts. They start just hanging out in the youth army t-shirt. They start posting videos about how terrific it is. And then, crucially, their friends look at this and think, well, what is this? What is this beret? How do I join? Right? And this is such a huge advancement for totalitarian and fascist youth groups, because back in the day, you had to wait for Monday night, 6 o'clock. That's when the youth group meets. That's it. Outside of that, the state has very little ability to reach you, right? Whereas now, the fascist rally, as I point out in the group, goes on 24/7 on social media. You can join it any time, night or day, and does it to look glittering and fun. You can be just like Nagorny. You can be just like your cool friend from down the road who's joined the group. And you know what? When I interviewed some of the leaders of the youth army, who are all really old, by the way, they're all like old Soviet people, so they don't really understand this social media stuff, but they're very grateful it's happening. They tell me that since last February, they have not been able to cope with the demand for young children signing up.
The gamification of the indoctrination of genocide. That's what they're doing. They're building an army to go out and kill for them on social media.
And
well, that's not terrifying. No, not at all.
The fights go on social media. You can imagine how vicious the comment threads are when you go and look and find somebody posting a pro-Ukrainian opinion or opinion criticizing the war or criticizing the state within these sort of youth army pro-Putin spaces. The reaction is, it's a pylon. It's visceral, just like we would see elsewhere on social media.
This is 4chan. This is 4chan in Russian doing the same things that 4chan and 8chan do, which is create murderers.
Russia has its own version of 4chan. It's called Dvach. Comes from
How do you spell that?
DVACH. And Dva, those first three letters, that means two in Russian. So it's a deliberate reference to 4chan. It's very similar. And when you look at the stuff that is being posted on Dvach today, it used to be sort of 10 years ago, it used to be just a sort of chaotic, anarchic mess. But now increasingly it is, there is some disturbing stuff there. Really unpleasant, homophobic, hateful, pro-genocidal stuff.
It's very, very, go ahead, high five.
Have they gotten to the desensitizing violent pictures of dead bodies and
everybody is well beyond that. And if
so we're once you get to that point, that's when the dissociation starts.
Yeah.
That's when you start to lose your humanity and the sociopathy kicks in.
Well, this is really embodied in the Russian social media space. There was a 3-word hashtag "Nam не стыдно." We're not ashamed. So every criticism that the West throws at Russia, you attempted to kill them violently. You're killing Ukrainians. This is immoral. This is wrong. Please don't do this. Everything will be turned upside down, turned into a joke, something that is comic, something to be ironically proud of. Hashtag "Nam не стыдно." And indeed, you can go to Moscow and on the subway, there are little stalls selling T-shirts, the Z T-shirts we will have seen, but also hashtag "Nam не стыдно."
Well, it's so hard to hear, but it is so incredibly important that we do not look away from what you are educating us on. Last time we had a guest who was from St. Petersburg, and we asked her to describe the area. She said, I don't want to talk about that. She's a war correspondent working from Ukraine right now, and she grew up in both countries. She's like, if a meteor struck St. Petersburg right now and it was blasted off the face of the earth, I would be happy. That was her response. You clearly spent time there, and I think it's very important. We talk to people who, experienced, living in Russia and get your input, because I believe most of this world is beautiful and people love each other. And wherever you go, you meet amazing, kind, cool people. But when we hear clips of old ladies saying we need to murder all the Ukrainians, clearly there's something going on there. And unfortunately, what I hear is what I saw in a documentary that interviewed old Nazis from World War II on why they had no trouble killing Jewish people. And they said because they thought they were doing something good, because they were propagandized to believe that these folks were the scourge of the earth, which is why we talk a lot about the dangers of dehumanization. But can you talk about what it's like to actually live there and what your observations were, and how we can somehow carve out some empathy for people who so clearly have been, for lack of a more elegant term, mind fucked?
So I lived in St. Petersburg in the mid-2000s, before the madness of the so-called patriotic turn that Putin pushed the country down in the early 2010s. And then I spent a long time teaching English to Russian kids. And it deeply saddens me that was a city that was hopeful. St. Petersburg has always been Russia's most European city. It is, or it was then, a very youthful city, a very liberal city. It was a city where you could go out and you could go to a gay club, and that was fine. There were openly gay clubs just existed. In fact, there was one glorious street where there was literally a straight club and a gay club owned by the same owner that were identically kitted out next to each other. But, follow your dreams, follow your heart, just go do what you want, man. It was great. It was nice at the time. And I knew many young Russians who just weren't interested in politics, wanted to, if they didn't believe in joining the European Union, they just wanted to be at peace with the world, right? And now I look back and I think about those children that I was teaching who are now between the ages of 18, 25 or thereabouts. And I genuinely wonder what's become of those children who are just a few years younger, who don't really remember what life was like back in those days where all things seemed possible, when those pathways were just multitudinous, myriad. And it is upsetting to me that it's very hard to see a path back for Russia, because I absolutely do not buy this idea that Russians are innately evil or that their culture fates them to behave in a certain way. There is no such thing as historical determinism. The reason that Messianism and these ideas of sacrifice are so widely spread is because people have pushed them. They are not ideas that have to exist in Russia today. So what can we do? Well, firstly, we have to understand that the military solution is part of it. I don't think that, Ukraine is not going to win such a great victory that it's going to make the state in Russia collapse. That's probably not going to happen. It'd be great if it could, but let's be realistic. It means we need to cut Russia out of the global financial system in a way that's more holistic than we've already done. And if you're interested in the things that we should do, go listen to Bill Browder. Bill Browder is great on this, and he is a man not afraid to give a full-hearted solution to the problem rather than talking in sort of half ideas. But it also means, and this is my argument in the book, Russia is still very undefended. They're even more undefended than we are when it comes to cyber attacks and cyber influence. And if we're going to take misinformation and disinformation around this younger generation seriously, we have to go push back within Russia. We can do that. It is way cheaper than fighting a hot war. Right? It costs trillions to fight wars, but it is very cheap to go and run influence operations. But here is the key. We do not have to lie, because we have the truth on our side. We have right on our side. What we need to do is go and reach out to Russians. And I know that many people listening to this will say, well, we've tried to do this before. And we have. And it was kind of working until we stopped doing it. And Putin really took control in a big way in the 2010s. But it is too risky to allow a younger generation to simply grow up with the sole influence of this patriarchal, incredibly destructive state. So we have to push back. In particular, we have to assist marginalized Russians. We have to assist queer Russians, and indeed the ethnic minorities who are not Russian but living within the space of the Russian Federation. And we have to show them, here is a way in which you can be Russian and queer. We have to show them Tchaikovsky. And yes. So Tchaikovsky is a great Russian. There's no way that you can say that he's not a great Russian, but he was also homosexual.
He was gay. We just talked about that on our last show. Yeah. Oh, this is so incredibly moving. This is like a classical music in my ear. I just heard Mahler last night, so I'm all filled up with classical music.
You can say, the great Russians. We can go on. Gogol, the great writer, Ukrainian. Right?
Yes.
I love Gogol.
Tolstoy. Yes. Well, when Russian kids read Tolstoy today, they read very much the war bit rather than the peace bit, but Tolstoy was a pacifist.
Right.
We have to talk about Tolstoy's pacifism. It doesn't mean destroying Russian culture. It means destroying the idea that Russian culture is inherently better than other ones, and that the only option is to be suspicious of and destructive towards other cultures.
Oh, I have two more things for you. Our time is up, but I must mine your brain on two more things. One is that we have a wonderful interview with a soldier from Ukraine, Volodymyr Demchenko, who's also a filmmaker, and he is inoculated against any form of Russian disinformation because he reads books. He grew up reading history. He is able and has been ever since he was a young man to see right through it. And I think we also have to address some post-literacy in all of this, because I think without understanding facts and history and reality, that might be very easy to be sold in unreality. So that's one thing I'd love a quick comment from you on. Go ahead and answer that, and then I have one more thing, and then I'll let Hi-Fi take us out.
I mean, yeah. You're right. Ultimately, we need to find ways to teach alternate forms of history. And by that, I don't mean fake forms of history, but the fact that history can have multiple interpretations and be understood from different viewpoints. And we have to teach critical thinking and information literacy. And we can do that towards Russians. The key, though, is that when we do these influence operations, it has to look like it's coming from within Russia and not from within that sort of the good Russian space. Because as soon as it comes from Alexei Navalny, as soon as it comes from the liberal opposition, they're queer, they're Western, they're Jewish, they're Nazi, they're bad.
Right.
You hate them, it's all CIA lies. Right.
Absolutely.
But it can be done.
I love what you're saying about how we can actually use truth to win this. We just need the will. I think that's amazing. My last question for you is that we here just accepted the risk and the bitterness of what follows when we're attacked for the work we do. We just sort of accepted it. Why put yourself on the front lines of this? It's not fun, you know? Why do it?
That's a bloody good question, isn't it? Not sure I have a terribly good answer.
Right?
You know what? There is a moral duty. I talk about Vasily Grossman in the book several times, and Vasily Grossman is, I think, the greatest author of the 20th century, a Soviet Jew who understood that he'd propagandized for the regime in World War II and came to regret it, and essentially wrote a novel-length suicide note called Life and Fate. If you haven't read this book, read it. It will change the way that you think about the world. And Grossman says, regardless of what else you have, even if you're in a death camp with somebody's holding a gun to your head, you can always say no. You have the choice not to comply. You can always be brave and do the right thing, even if it means you're going to get a shitload of trouble or somebody could kill you. And so I try to live and work by that moral command, that it is easy to say nothing. It is convenient to say nothing, but if you have the expertise, if you have the knowledge, or even if you have any kind of a platform, talking to friends, talking to family, you can still influence people and you can still do the right thing.
I needed that. That was like a shot in the arm for me today. I so needed that. Hi-Fi, final question.
Final question. Well, it involves a little story. I went to DC a few weeks back, and I was in a room full of people who worked for embassies and military types and high-ranking, high-thinking people. It was a discussion with Keir Giles about Russia's war on everybody. And the question I asked was, who in NATO is developing the abilities to insert cognitive warfare into the Russian information space? And people actually laughed at that. And I find that extremely, extremely, extremely troubling. What are your thoughts on that?
The fear in the West seems to be, what if Russia discovers our information warfare? And states, in the Russian press, there'll be a big blow up and say, well, the CIA are running influence operations against us. Well, the problem is that they say this all the time anyway. Even when it's not true. They say that Ukraine, the whole product of the Zelensky regime, is just the product of a CIA influence operation designed to lure Ukraine away from Russia. They say that the CIA is operating in Russia anyways. Why not bloody do it? Right?
Why not use the boy who cried wolf against them?
Yeah, because it's not going to change anyone's mind. And yet you might still be able to doing this on a vast scale. Bear in mind, it's cheap. You will be able to influence some people. And if that means saving some Ukrainian lives or some homosexual lives, or who knows where the trigger will turn next, then that is, for me, that's worthwhile. And I think that is the point of us being liberal democracies. We're supposed to do the right thing and not do the easy thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. you're stirring up all kinds of feels right now. And we had Peter Tatchell on our show multiple times. He's a human rights activist and he's a legend. He has a podcast that I just listened to. And sometimes it's very important to go outside of our country to see what's happening inside our country. And it basically, podcast showed the 1,100 or 1,000 plus bills against gay rights that are occurring in America as I'm speaking right now. It exposed what is happening in places like Arkansas and Tennessee against drag shows. It exposed the genital inspection bills, things that sound absolutely insane. I learned by going outside my country and coming back in. And I believe that it's the activists, the artists, the historians, the painters, and the poets who are the people that have to be rising to the occasion right now. The Banksies, wherever we can find it. And can you give our viewers a artist or somebody that you recommend who is already fighting this war on the front lines so we can leave on an inspirational note?
So there are many, many Ukrainian artists, but I want to single out one Russian artist who I interview in the book and I tell his story. His name is Ilya Fyodorov, and he is a young artist from Moscow who is queer, and it took him a long time to come to terms with that. And when the state started introducing anti-homosexual propaganda laws, he sort of began to fight himself internally and found it increasingly hard to live. And you have to read the book to find out quite how psychologically destructive this was. His story is symbolic of the ways in which the state has tried to get queer people to destroy themselves in Russia internally. And a quarter of Russian LGBTQ community members tried to commit suicide between 2013 and I think 2018, 2019, which is tragic, right? That is a terrible number. And that is encouraged by the state. But Ilya produces this incredible work that is about transgenderism. The state has tried to attack him, tried to transform his work, tried to suppress it in recent years. And Ilya has had to flee to New York because he's no longer safe in Russia. So if you're in New York, he is having exhibitions. You should go check out his work. Otherwise, he has a fabulous Instagram feed and website where he's showing stuff off. And he's just terrific. He's an incredible guy, really interesting thinker. So there are good Russians. But
that's what I needed. That's like, again, another shot in the arm. I love it so much. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Please, everybody, support his book by Z Generation or Z Generation, however you want to pronounce it. Support the work of this incredible historian. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for your beautiful insights. And please come back. We're going to have more questions for you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ian Garner, for coming on to our show. That is just, I mean, I don't even know what to say. Mic drop after mic drop. It's really incredible. So we talked a lot about the civic duty of art, but I just want to give a quick mention to, no matter what we're going through in this war, those of us who stay loud and focused on exposing the villains of this war, we have to find our joy, because this is life right now. This is life during wartime. And I just want to show you a little clip from me finding my joy last night. I saw Mahler 3 at the Walt Disney Concert Hall with 86-year-old Zubin Mehta as the conductor. And I just want to share with you guys that despite the hell weekend that I had, I did not miss one single minute of that 100-minute performance. I was present and joyful for all of it. And this man, just to give you guys a feel for it, this man got a standing ovation just for walking on stage. That's how excited people were to see this maestro. It's not every day you get to see history, but my point is, find your joy, practice self-care, and stay loud and fight the good fight with us, man. Here we go, a little clip of Zubin Mehta's 4th standing ovation of the night.
Really, Beethoven and Brahms are at the heart of
the repertoire of the wicked wonder.
Beautiful.
Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the